All right. Now the point is, what happens when you have an SNAT and a virtual server? All right. So we have SNAT as a listener configuration, and we have virtual server configuration. So now we will see what happens when we have both, and what happens when we have only SNAT as listener. So ideally, this configuration is something like this, right? So this is a configuration. Uh, this is a virtual server which is listening on all the IPs, which means it is a wildcard virtual server. Now, do you guys know what is a wildcard virtual server?
No, Trilok.
Okay, let me clarify it. It's a virtual server, but which listens on all the IPs. All right. For example, your internal servers, if they want to access internet, and if their default gateway is pointing to the F5, ultimately your all the queries would be coming to the F5, right? And your F5 needs to route it, isn't it? But virtual server should have a listener, right? SNAT as listener is I accept it, right? But other than SNAT as a listener, if we want a virtual server to be listening for all the IPs and to forward the traffic, then in that case there would be a problem, right? See when the traffic is coming from outside to inside, we are very specific, because we know what are the applications we are running in the backend. We are very clear about it. So we will create only those virtual servers to we will create the virtual servers only for that traffic which is intended to our inside. Are you guys with me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. But when you are trying to reach the internet, see, out there on the internet you have billions of websites. If you keep on going and if you keep on creating a specific virtual servers, how many virtual servers will you create on the LTM box? You understand, right? So just to avoid that, we will have a wildcard virtual server, where in the wildcard virtual server the destination IP will be 0000/0, and the port will be star, which means
Any port.
any port number. This is called as wildcard virtual server. Now you might know what is a impact of this 000/0, right? If you want to match every route to every IP, and you have a device which cannot handle all the specific routes, what you would do, you would configure a default route, right? What do you mean by default route, and what are you configuring as part of default route? You're saying, hey, IP route 0000/0. What does this mean?
Like any
It
list of
matches
IP.
everything,
Yeah.
right? It matches any IP.
Yeah.
The same is a concept here. So when your servers are trying to reach any IP, it matches this wildcard virtual server. Okay, so here we have a wildcard virtual server which is listening for all the IPs, and at the same time we also have an SNAT to translate addresses to 207.10.1.102. But what sources are we translating? Only this range, 172.16.0.0/16 range. Okay, now now let's see the difference. Now the traffic is incoming. Okay, and in the backend we have two servers. One is from 172.16.20.1, which is under this range. SNAT as the listeners configured the range, and another one is 192.168.5.3. Okay, which is completely class C and which is out of the scope for the SNAT as listener. Now, when the traffic is incoming, I mean, when the traffic is coming from the 172.16.20.1 class B range server, it would match the virtual server because, like I mentioned yesterday, first the listener would be matched is virtual servers, then SNAT as listener, then your NAT as listeners. So the very first one is virtual servers. So here we have virtual server, which is accepting everything, which is listening for everything. So this server traffic should match virtual server, and packet processing is done according to this guy. I mean, whatever this kind of virtual server is, if it is just an IP forwarding virtual server, IP forwarding would be done. If it is doing a proxy, proxy would be done. Whatever, so it is, that depends on type of virtual server. But yeah, packet processing is done based on the virtual server, and if it is a proxy and if there is a load balancing done, routing, everything would be done according to this guy, this virtual server, right? Maybe we will attach a pool of ISPs, right? So we have ISP1 and we have ISP2, let's say, those which are connected to internet, and we are load balancing. So this load balancing, routing, everything is done for this 172.16.20.1 traffic through the virtual server, based on virtual server. Okay. Now there is another thing, SNAT within virtual server. You understand, right? SNAT within virtual server, which we have seen yesterday. We go in virtual server, we source address translation, we will enable it, and we can configure automap, or we can configure SNAT pool, right? If that is enabled on this virtual server, SNAT is also done based on this virtual server. Okay, but in this case, it is not done. Okay, let's consider it is not done. So what happens is, routing of this traffic would be done based on this virtual server, and then it would match the SNAT as listener configuration, where it says, hey, S172.16.0.0/16, this IP is from that range. So it is matching the traffic is matching this rule. It will be translated to 2710.1.102 and forwarded to the servers, whatever the servers it is. Maybe it is 8.8.8.8. Right? So traffic is routed based on virtual server, but only SNAT is done based on the 207.10.1.102. Now traffic is incoming from this server 192.168.5.3. Now in this case, it would match the virtual server. So routing is done, load balancing or routing or whatever. So it is done based on the virtual server. But this traffic would not match the SNAT as listener rule. So this traffic would still be routed, but source NAT is not done. Whatever the IP it is, 192.168.5.3 it is, in the same way it would go out. You got the difference, right? What happens if the traffic is matching both the conditions and if it is matching only one condition? Now we will take this virtual server off. Now when the traffic is incoming from 172.16.20.1, now we don't have the virtual server, but only SNAT as a listener. Okay. We don't have virtual server in the sense that doesn't mean that we not at all have virtual servers. No, we have other specific virtual servers, but Towards internet, we don't have wildcard virtual server. This time, traffic would be routed based on the SNAT, which means normal routing table. F5 would check the routing table. If the route is there, SNAT is done to this traffic to 207.10.1.102 and routed because the traffic is from 172.16.20.1. But without virtual server, only 172.16 traffic processed and not 192.168 because this traffic, it doesn't have a virtual server to listen. We have a SNAT as a listener, but the rule is not matching because source is not valid. It would check for the NAT. NAT is not there. Traffic would be dropped. It would not be processed. Make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Now, SNAT recommendations is FI recommends that whatever the number of VLANs you have, you create a pool with at least one translation address for each exit VLAN. It's a recommendation. It doesn't mean that you have to do this, right? But it's a recommendation that you create a pool, and in the pool you create that you add a translation address, at least one address from each VLAN, so that when the traffic has to be routed to any VLAN, it would have an IP and it would translate. Right? So if the traffic has to go to 16.x.x, it would be it would have an IP from that range. If it has to go to class C range, vice versa. So it would have that, right? Yeah. Now SNAT configurations, we have translations, which means the IP to which the sources are translated. For this, we have three options. One is IP address, where you will manually mention the address, whatever the address it is. But here you will have the scope for only one IP. If you select the IP address, we can only add one IP manually. If it is SNAT pool, again, we are manually defining the IPs, to which the sources to be translated. But here it is addresses. That means we can have options, or we can give we can have multiple IPs. We can select multiple IPs. So in case if you want to translate to a group of IPs, because you have a high amount of traffic going through, then a single IP would not be possible, right? It's not feasible. So that's where you will go for a pool of addresses. And in the auto map, like IP address, we have only one IP, but that can be either the self IP or it is a floating self IP. So we cannot define an IP address here. If it is an auto map, we don't have an option to define an address, right? You don't want to use a self IP, or you don't want to use a floating self IP, but you want to go for some other IP. Other excluding these IPs, you want to define another IP. If it is auto map, you cannot do it. That's the reason we have IP address. Make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, configuration, we can configure SNAT as listeners, which is the first one, where a client source listener, SNAT as listener, it's completely based on the client's source IPs. So it's a client source listener. This is one option we can use. Another one is within a virtual server, SNAT within a virtual server, like we have seen already yesterday, the practical. So where we have automap or SNAT pool. Now, when we have multiple SNATs, what is the precedence? Which one would be highly preferred? So when we want to do the SNAT, if we have multiple listeners, always SNAT within virtual server takes precedence. Right? What does this mean? You have an virtual server, wildcard virtual server 0.0.0.0.0. Within this virtual server, you have configured SNAT, right? Maybe let's say you configured automap. And at the same time, you also have an SNAT as listener. Where you said, hey, if the traffic is from 172.16.0.0/16, translate it to this IP 207.10.1.102. Now your server traffic, maybe your server is from 172.16.20.1. It falls under this range, right? Now the traffic from this server, it would hit the F5 to go for internet. Now it is matching the virtual server because first it matches the virtual server. So it lookups for the virtual server. So it matches the virtual server. But within this virtual server itself, we have an auto map, which is doing SNAT already. That's it. Your SNAT and your routing would be done as per this only. Now, again, SNAT as listener will not have any action to do because SNAT within virtual server always takes precedence from any other SNATs. So this time, though the traffic matches this SNAT as a listener, SNAT will not happen based on this SNAT as listener because automap has already, SNAT within virtual server has already taken the action.